SaaS Backwards is sponsored by Austin Lawrence Group, specializing in demand gen for SaaS. It sure is noisy. I deleted 100 emails from vendors just this morning. Your buyer has gotten better at ignoring you, and you're gonna need a big idea if you want to cut through all that clutter. Austin Lawrence is just the right agency to help you find it. So if your campaigns are falling on deaf eyeballs, let's talk. Visit austinlawrence.com today and let's build something bigger.
Welcome to the SaaS Backwards podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CMOs and CEOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Declan Mulkeen. He's CMO at StrategicABM, an account-based marketing agency. Hey, Declan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ken, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Before we dig into the conversation, give us just a little bit about you and your firm.
Okay, so I'm the CMO of StrategicABM, Ken, and the account-based marketing agency. We've been around for about almost 20 years now, actually. And like most agencies that have been in existence for that long, we've gone through the whole evolution in terms of what marketing has been doing over the course of the last 15, 20 years in terms of B2B marketing. And probably for the last 5-6 years, we've dedicated ourselves 100% now to account-based marketing. And we work with B2B tech brands all over the world. And we do some very interesting account-based marketing, where my job as a CMO is to kind of twofold, really. One, obviously, is to talk about ABM, share stories about ABM, share stories about what good ABM looks like, and then also to generate demand for the agency's services through the work that I do on LinkedIn, through the work that I do through my own account-based marketing campaigns. So happy to share some of that insight with you today, Ken, and to tell your audience a little bit more about account-based marketing and what good and bad ABM looks like.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the history of ABM. I think it'd be good to level set how we got to where we are today.
Okay, well, it's interesting, actually, because a lot of people think that ABM has been created by a lot of these tech brands that have become quite well known in the course of the last few years without mentioning any names. But actually, account-based marketing is almost 20 years old now in terms of how it's been defined, its methodology, the systems, and the way that it actually has been created. And it was actually created by a lady called Bev Burgess, who is quite well known in the account-based marketing industry based out of the UK. And I had her as a guest on my own podcast called Let's Talk ABM a couple of years ago, actually. And she was explaining to me that she was having dinner one evening back in 2002 with about 25 marketing leaders from very well-known companies. And she was explaining to me, it's quite funny, really. She said on one side of her was a very senior marketing chap from Accenture, and on the other side was a very senior marketing chap from Unisys. And they started telling her about this new project they were doing, and they had called it client-centric marketing. And it was really about how to apply marketing to specific accounts as opposed to the market. And that got her thinking about that approach, and she basically started doing research on what they were doing back in 2002. And then in 2003, that basically turned into a defined way of working, which she coined as account-based marketing. And if you go forward now 19 years, we are where we are today, and it's obviously grown enormously, particularly in the last 3-4 years. And that's really the potted history of where ABM came from.
Yeah, that last 3 to 4 years of acceleration, probably a lot to marketers like ourselves trying to find things that actually are still working well. As the channels have gotten really noisy in lead generation land, we're definitely looking for ways to be relevant. I think it'd be worth talking a little bit about the relationship between demand generation, lead generation, and account-based marketing. I certainly think they're all synergistic, but I'd love your take on how you guys position that with your clients.
Yeah, I did a post about this actually over the weekend, basically saying that ABM is an addition to what you're already doing and it's not a substitute. And I think that's really an important message for people to take home, really, is that each business has got its own reasons for what they're doing. Each business has their own business outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And not every one of these different strategies is the right strategy for all organizations. So for some companies, lead gen is the right approach. For some companies, demand gen is the right approach. So some companies, ABM is the right approach, or a mix of all all the above. So I think the way that I see the three working, demand generation, I see it as being the essence of demand generation. It's about how do you build attention, how do you build interest, and how do you build your brand into the market? And obviously through all the different tactics and events and content marketing and social, etc. So how do you create that demand? How do you capture demand? How do you accelerate that demand? How do you expand that demand within the market that you're looking to penetrate, whether that's mid-market enterprise, whether that's United States, whether that's Europe, whether that's within the cyber tech industry, or whatever you're looking to create and build that demand. It's much more broad-based marketing in terms of you're targeting a much wider set of accounts, a much wider industry, a much wider market. And I think what a lot of people who are talking about demand generation at the moment, ultimately, the aim of demand generation is that you surround your market with your brand, with your story, with your thought leadership, with who you are and what makes you different and how you help people, that ultimately the companies should come to you. That is best in class demand generation. Lead generation has its part in that because obviously all the work that you do will generate leads. And obviously we've been doing marketing for a while now, and we've all been involved in MQLs and SQLs and all that kind of thing, and all these kind of acronyms that us marketers know and love, or not love so much.
Or not so much, right?
Yeah. And I think we've done ourselves a lot of a disservice actually by having all these acronyms. We've created our own language that doesn't really help us to communicate with the rest of the business. And that's probably a story for later. But I think lead gen, obviously, you're capturing your lead through all your content. Those leads, in the majority of cases, don't have really any intent. And then you're putting those leads through some kind of process with your sales team, with your marketing team, to try to bring them through a process whereby some of them will convert. Lead generation has had a lot of detractors because of the fact that there's a low acceptance from sales, because sales are saying, hey guys, we're busy. We've got our own business. We know which accounts we want to win. We've got our own conversations, and you're bugging us or throwing over the fence a whole bunch of leads and saying, hey guys, give these guys a call. And we're saying, well, look, they're not interested. So I think that lead gen has a part to play in the demand gen funnel, but it's also been quite burnt recently. And I think the ABM of the three is much more laser focused, because in ABM, you're saying, hey, we've done our homework, we've done our research. We know from the data, we know from talking to our sales teams, we know from looking at intent data, we know from looking at our first party data in terms of which companies are interacting with our brand. We know which companies we need to either win or which companies we need to grow, because it's not just about new logo acquisition, it's also about growing existing accounts. So we know which ones we want. So it's much more laser focused. It's much more focused on the accounts that you want to grow or to win. It's much more what I like to call full funnel. The way I see the difference is demand generation is a bit more either above the funnel or top of the funnel, and ABM actually occurs through the whole funnel and thereafter, even when the customer is now a customer, so to speak. So you've already won the customer, they're now in your system. So it's laser focused, it's full funnel. You're working very closely with sales. And I was talking to a guest on Let's Talk ABM the other day, and she said something very interesting to me. She said that she saw the work that she does in ABM as being much more like sales work, because sales and ABM happens later in the funnel, which I thought was a really interesting take on that, really. So I think there's a key point here, which I always say to people, is it's not a question of or, it's a question of and. So ABM and demand generation work really well together. So demand generation can feed demand into an ABM motion if those accounts are coinciding, or indeed the demand generation work is triggering accounts that should go into your ABM motion. So there's definitely a relationship. Another one of my guests said to me that ABM and demand gen are like cousins. So they're definitely related. They definitely have to get on. And it's definitely not a question of choose one over the other. My advice to everyone is look at your business outcomes, see what works best for your company. And then it's a question of and, not a question of or.
Yeah, I think also in our experience in clients, we're using the lead gen work, especially to help us message test if we don't have a good idea of our ICP. So that's allowing us to be more effective in thought leadership work and also in our ABM creative, right? We're focusing more on issues that matter to the people we want to sell to. So if you really know your product market fit, if that's really good, and you really know your clients, that may not be a value add for the relationship between lead gen and ABM. But certainly if you're a younger company or if you're about to go through a pivot, that's one way to use those tools together. Recent experience I thought I'd share with our listeners. Hey, let's talk about the technology vendors, because I think that it's too easy for marketers to fall in love with technology and not necessarily understand what the possibilities are for a go-to-market motion. So obviously the tech helps us in certain ways, but like what's the superset of ABM over the tech itself? Maybe just a quick bit of what are we doing in the tech, but what are we doing outside of the tech also to make ABM really work?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, really, because like I said before at the opening of the show, the tech vendors have done a very, very good marketing job of making a lot of the market think that they actually created ABM and that ABM is all about technology. And we run this thing called ABM Lunch and Learn, where we've done about 120, 130, where we help companies to understand ABM. We help them to understand whether it works for them or not, whether it should work for them, etc. But sometimes I hear prospective customers or tech brands saying, well, yeah, so our marketing operations team, they've bought this technology and they've asked us to use it. And I'm like, you mean you're being forced to use technology? And they said, well, yeah, it's been given to us and they'd like us to use it for our ABM program. So sometimes with these large organizations, there's a complete disconnect between different marketing departments or within the marketing department, marketing operations, ABM team or marketing team or demand gen team, etc. So the idea that you can't do ABM without technology is just not true. And in fact, I actually tell people you should do ABM without technology to actually get your ABM to work first. And then you can worry about what tech you need to do later. The slogan that we like to say is strategy first, technology second. Always think about your strategy first. Always think about your processes first. Always think about your people first. The technology will answer those questions, strategy, process, people, but you don't start with technology. So I think that's really important for people to understand today. And my advice to people is you need a good pen and paper and to sit down and write a strategy to think about what are the business outcomes you're looking to achieve in the organization. Is ABM potentially the right solution for you to meet those business outcomes? And therefore write down what you want to achieve. And you can do this in a very good way without any technology. You can do this by just working with your head of sales, your VP of sales, asking him or her which accounts are they looking to close this quarter, next quarter, and then sitting down with your team and saying, look guys, we've got these 5 accounts that our head of sales is working on. What can we do to help them? So we could run this event, we could do this kind of wine tasting, we could do this kind of thought leadership program, we could do this, that, the other. Would this help our VP of sales to move the dial? Would this help our VP of sales to have a conversation with these potential customers? And you ask yourself those questions and just come up with a strategy to help in the short term. That will help you build that really important relationship with sales. It will also spread the word within the company of, hey, look what these guys are doing. Look what marketing and sales have just achieved together. They've just closed 2 huge deals by doing this very bespoke, customized program. Let's do some more. Then the CEO will say, hey guys, I've just heard something. How much money do you need to do this bigger? And then suddenly you're going to have a problem because people will actually come to you and give you money for you to actually amplify this more. So that's how I would say to people to look at technology. It's going to come later in the process.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. The ability to get closer to sales through alignment with their imperatives, right? Their strategic imperatives. This is a really healthy process as opposed to what you talked about earlier, where we're sending over these manufactured MQLs and some of them are good and many of them are garbage. Yeah. So that's sort of distancing the sales organization from marketing. So here's a really healthy process. And also for marketers, I got to believe most of us have figured it out, but the salespeople have the budget, right? Sales has the budget. They're generating the revenue. We think it's our budget, but I think the fact is, for the most part, obviously marketing is bigger than revenue generation, but there's a lot of budget available in sales for things that convert. So I think if we want to look for how do we improve our fraternal relations, our position in the business, extend the career path of the CMO, and do well for the business itself, that organic look at ABM, I think is really important, and really befriending the sales leader peer, really important.
Absolutely.
Hey, let's turn to, like, we saw a decision tree. Was this your decision tree? I think it was, right? That was a lot of fun. Okay. So if you go on Declan's LinkedIn, he's got this decision tree chart on who's right for ABM, but I think it'd be fun just to walk through people through that logic simply.
Yeah, and just to make people laugh a little bit, on the left-hand side of the decision tree, I've said, well, the first branch is, are you B2B or are you B2C? And then the question, if you say I'm B2C, then on the left-hand side, the question was, do you have a lot of money? And if the answer is yes, then you say, let's party and we can do everything. And if the answer is no from a B2C point of view, I said, just do TikTok. That's just to make people laugh. But then obviously going down the right-hand side with B2B, the question we always ask people, say, hey guys, look, we'd like to do some ABM. And we have some questions that we ask people to see whether they are the right fit for ABM. And I think the first question we look to see is, are you selling into mid-market and into enterprise? So that's one of the filters that we have, because ABM is kind of a good fit when you're selling a high value or a complex solution product into enterprise or mid-market. So that's question number one. Question number two is, do you have a long sales cycle? Because if you have a long sales cycle, there's going to be lots of people involved in the process. We've all seen the numbers, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 people are involved in any single buying purchase. So that's a key question as well. Is it a long sales cycle? Is there a large buying committee that you need to influence? Each person needs a different message. Each person needs to be influenced in a different way. Are you looking to move in your maturity? Like we mentioned earlier, you've been doing lead generation, you've been doing demand generation. You're now looking to step up and to add a new lens onto the market, a new way of adding additional revenue, a new way of accelerating a lot of your growth. And ABM is a very good fit for that, because some of the outcomes from running an ABM program successfully is you're closing deals quicker, you're accelerating pipeline, you're increasing the average order value of what you're selling. So there's a number of metrics that come off the back of doing ABM well. Conversely, when are you not a good fit for ABM? In our opinion, you're not a good fit for ABM if you're still a SaaS company, still at the product market fit stage, you're still testing the market, you're still getting some feedback about your product and how it works. If that's the case, lead gen, content marketing, brand, demand gen are much better for you. If your contract value, how much you would bill a company in a year. If it's less than about $50,000, ABM isn't necessarily the best fit for you, because you need resources. You need people internally, and you need potentially an agency like our own or another agency. And then obviously you need to then be spending on various elements of that, whether it's the account experience, whether it's the media budget, whether it's some kind of direct mail, a whole bunch of areas that you could invest in. Also, going back to my point around SaaS, if you're not targeting mid-market and enterprise and you're targeting smaller companies, then that kind of ties back to the average contract value. So normally there is a relationship between selling to small companies and the value. If you're selling $5,000 a year or $10,000 a year or whatever, ABM is not necessarily the right fit. And the very last point, Ken, is one which is an interesting one for us as marketers, is sometimes companies haven't really got a marketing department yet, and they've got much more of a sales-led culture, and they might have somebody doing a little bit of SEO, a little bit of content marketing, or a little bit of email marketing, but they haven't really got a marketing department. And we always say to clients or potential clients that you really need to have some resources in your marketing department, because you need to do a lot of work. So if you don't have those resources, you're going to struggle. So those are the two branches that we would say.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're not going to run a wine tasting series for someone who can only spend $3,000 a year with you, right? I mean, it just doesn't pan out.
No, you probably send them a case of wine in the post, and that'd probably be sufficient.
Yeah, or maybe just a bottle, not a whole case.
Well, whatever. I mean, it depends what kind of wine, but All
right. Well, I'm not going out drinking with you then.
If you send me just one bottle, but there are other tactics, other strategies that kind of lend themselves more to the value. It's a value exchange, right? It's a value exchange. So what do you need to invest for what you're going to get as a return?
Fair enough. I think a topic that I want to make sure we get to is, how do we get started, right? So I'm a likely situation is I'm relatively new to a business as a marketing leader, and I've found your chart and I say, hey, Eureka, ABM might be a tactic here. And I've done the assessment. We do know our product market fit, but for whatever reason, we did not focus on strategic accounts and marketing and sales, have not yet aligned around this. What's a good way to get started? How do we start that process?
There are two answers. Answer number one is a little bit what I mentioned earlier, which is you start by just getting to sit down with your VP of sales. You get them to give you 5 accounts. You work for 3 months on those 5 accounts and you see the result. That's beta testing. You just do that. You find out what worked. You find out what relationship you have with the sales team. You find out what kind of pushbacks you're getting from customers or from prospective customers. You kind of try to document all that. That's part number one. Part number two is, if you've gone through that process now and you need to build out a wider ABM strategy for your organization, then obviously, and you'll need to have investment for that, and you'll need to have a team for that. Then obviously you need to start thinking about, how do I actually document that? So how do you build the foundations? So you need to kind of build almost like an operating model, because obviously with ABM, there's an awful lot of foundational work. You've got to know your ideal customer profile. You've got to be very clear on that, your ICP, the whole organization, particularly sales, customer success, and your C-suite have to be aligned that these are the types of customers you want. And very often that alignment is not always there. So what kind of customers do we want and why? Then you can go ahead and choose the accounts that you want to go after. And that will be informed by your ICP. So you're matching your ICP. So you're not going after customers that don't meet your ICP. And then B, you're using the data that you're able to pull upon, which is obviously your first party data, what's happening in your website, what's happening in your database, what are you finding is the interaction you're already having with these accounts accounts that you can see. Third-party data, obviously we talk a lot about intent data and intent data platforms, of which there are many. You can feed all that into your data assessment. That will then allow you to select accounts. From there, you prioritize the accounts, and then you work out, well, okay, well, what's the best way to approach this? So we've got these types of accounts in these geographies, in these industries. So rule number one is if you are going to do an ABM, you need to make sure that you bunch them together in the right way. So if you're going to do ABM and you've got 2 pharmaceutical, 3 financial services, 4 chemical, 5 financial services, this is the road to ruin. This is the road to madness. This is the road to being locked up in the local institute. You need to bunch them together in a way that makes sense, because you need to get economies of scale. You need to be able to say, okay, we're going to do a campaign into these 10 financial services companies. And we've done our homework. We've done some insights. We've done some research. We understand the value proposition that we want to give to the market is this. This is the messaging. This is what we know the pain is. This is the challenge that they're having with some changes in financial authorities, or this is coming over the horizon, or whatever is happening. But if you break it down and you try to go after too many pieces of the market, you're going to not succeed. So make sure you are very clear. Make sure you group them into what we call clusters of accounts. Start small. Always start small. Don't go crazy. I remember I was interviewing the head of ABM at Fujitsu, and a lovely lady called Andrea Clatworthy. And she said that one of her mistakes that she made at the beginning, and she's one of the kind of ABM gurus, she said one of the mistakes she made was she went after 56 accounts. And she said that was just too many. 56 is just way too many. So that they went through an iteration and they cut it down, and it was far more successful. So start small, pilot a cluster that have some similarity, either the same sector or they have the same problem. They could, in theory, be across different sectors, but they say they have the same problem. And once you've got that, then you need to make sure that you've built that rapport, you've built that relationship, you've got your sales team on board, because ABM is not ABM without sales. And I think that's a really important thing for people to realize, is if sales are not involved in ABM, it is not ABM. Okay, you can call it whatever you want to call it. You know, you can call it origami, you can call it Fujitsu, you can call whatever you want to call it, but it's not ABM. So if sales are not involved, forget about it. And then the very last thing is people are going to be asking you questions. People are going to be saying, what the hell are you doing? When is it going to pay back? What does it look like? What's our ROI? All these painful questions that us marketers get asked, and we sometimes squirm and we don't know the answers. Well, you need to know the answers. So you need to build, before you start, your reporting methodology. How are you going to report on your ABM program? What are the numbers looking like? What are the quantitative numbers and the qualitative? Because ABM is a lot about qualitative data. So how many relationships you're building, what's your brand impression looking like, etc. So you need to make sure you have all those lined up. So those 3 things really: build the foundation, build your operating model, document it, make sure you're choosing the right accounts, get the data and the insights on those accounts. So you make sure when you start building your campaigns and your content, it's all aligned to what the data is telling you. And then make sure you then build a relationship with sales. And then thirdly, make sure that you have the reporting methodology in place to make sure you answer those questions.
So starting at the end there, the reporting and KPIs, there's an education process that you might have to take people through, because your predecessor in the scenario where you're the new CMO may have been focused on MQLs and SQLs and the lead gen pipeline KPIs. And we're going to be talking about different things. We're going to be talking about the number of engaged contacts, the utilization of content, the attendance at events, ultimately improving the ACV, right, of the deals and long-term value, lifetime value of these clients. So there's going to be a reset required in some sense on the KPIs that matter for this kind of campaign. And I think also the engagement with sales and the resource in marketing, we're going to need them to help us, right? We're going to need sales to help us, or we're not going to be successful. I think all those things are really interesting. And if you haven't done it before, it could seem like a lot to try and take on.
It's a different mindset. And I think, there's a reporting methodology that we use that was developed by an organization called ITSMA, which is kind of like an overarching organization that created a lot of the ABM methodology 20 years ago. But it's called the 3 R's. So it's reputation, relationships, and revenue. So therefore, if you're building the reputation inside an account, if you're creating the relationships inside the account, those 2 R's are the leading indicators of the 3rd R, which is revenue. So with reputation, you're building your credibility, you're opening new markets. As you said, you're creating new contacts in that account. You're identifying the key stakeholders. You're engaging with them. They're attending your events. They're becoming internal advocates of you, which is really important. So you've actually got sponsors inside the company who are saying, hey, you know what? You need to talk to Ken because he knows everything you need to know about this subject. You're deepening those relationships. You're building referrals, etc. So those 2 R's, reputation and relationships, will then drive the revenue, which you'll first start seeing in pipeline, and then it will come through win, size of deals won, how quickly you're winning those deals, which I mentioned earlier in terms of deal velocity, average contract value, etc. So I think those are really important for the audience to realize, is that you need to change your reporting mindset.
Hey, you mentioned that you have both a podcast and a Lunch and Learn series. Is the Lunch and Learn a public thing?
We've been doing it for about 2 years, 18 months now, as either one-on-one with another CMO or with their team. And we've delivered about 120, 130 of them really. And they're absolutely fascinating. I try to attend as many as I can to give my marketing expertise and to share with them what
is that an ABM
working.
tactic for your firm?
It's weird, actually. Indirectly, it is. The reason why we started it was because it was just early days of the pandemic, and we were literally wanting to talk to the market, like many people. And obviously, we were all digital. We were all sitting at home or whatever, and we wanted to talk to the market. We wanted to help the market understand how they could overcome some of these digital challenges, how they could overcome some of these digital marketing challenges. So we kind of launched it. We did a soft launch. I think it was in the summer of 2020, and then we kind of launched it in the fall of 2020 properly. And from there, it's interesting actually, because basically the only filter that we say to people is you have to be a B2B tech brand to attend a Lunch and Learn. We can't share proper expertise. We're trying to share as much expertise as we can, and we can't talk to people outside of that area because it's not our domain. So as long as you're within the B2B tech space, then we would run a Lunch and Learn with you. And what we're finding is it all depends on their level of maturity. So a lot of companies are very, very early on in their ABM journey. So they're looking to learn. So we delivered a lot of these Lunch and Learns, and no sale comes from it. That doesn't mean a sale won't come in a year's time or 18 months' time. It may well do, because their level of maturity will increase. But we're doing it primarily from an education point of view. But we've actually won a number of accounts through this ABM strategy, if you want to call it that. But it's been a really interesting thing, because I think what they've said to us, it reminds me of something of my old days in marketing. They've said to us, look, the experience that you took us through over a course of several months is exactly the experience we want to take our prospective customers through. So we've actually almost shown them a road and a way of them talking to their customers or potential customers in a very different way. So almost like not do the whole book a demo and this kind of stuff, which is really kind of late in the funnel. You have to have a lot of intent to click book a demo. We're actually bringing the conversation a lot earlier in the cycle. And that's what our customers who are selling B2B tech solutions need to do. So in a funny kind of way, we're showing them what they can do.
Sure. It's really interesting. So for other service providers out there, maybe this is a great way to build rapport and reputation within target accounts. I think that's a great idea.
Ken, before you say that, I should go and trademark this just to make sure that nobody steals these ideas.
We'll give you due credit. Don't you worry.
Okay.
And if people want to check out your podcast, what's the name of the podcast again, and where is it?
The podcast is called Let's Talk ABM. So you can find it on Apple, Spotify, etc. I do a lot of work on LinkedIn as well. So you'll always find me talking about account-based marketing on LinkedIn. So those two places really.
Awesome. And the website for your company again is?
StrategicABM.com.
Well, that says it all. Hey, Declan, thank you so much for being our guest on SaaS Backwards. I think there's a lot of value in the content, and I'd welcome any feedback from listeners. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Ken. Thanks for having me. It's been great to share some of our ABM journey with you.
Awesome. And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so anywhere you can find podcasts. SaaS Backwards is on all the major directories, and Let's Talk ABM as well. Declan, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempet at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.